I think ISI's biggest contributions lie mainly in the infrastructure that it's created and disseminated. I mean, it isn't that ISI designed these great designs, it's that ISI created a system that allowed researchers at lots of different universities to advance the field. ISI was formed because of the Pentagon Papers. Daniel Ellsberg worked for the Rand Corporation, where all of the founders came from. And the Nixon White House was very upset that those papers were leaked. And as a result, cut Rand's ceiling by 20%. Now, the ceiling is a much worse cut than cutting the budget. If somebody cuts your budget, you just go somewhere else to get the money. If they cut the ceiling, you're not allowed to go anyplace else, so it's a real cut. Rand's crown jewels was the policy studies where Daniel Ellsberg worked, and they wanted to keep all that. So they redistributed that cut to the other divisions, which were much smaller. We were in something called the High Technology Division, and the cut that was allocated to us was 50%. And this was at a time when ARPA, our funder, wanted to double our budget. So we were essentially looking at a 3/4 cut in our ceiling. So when this happened, I called up some of my friends up at Xerox PARC and told them that I needed a job. An hour later, I had a job up there. I went in and told Keith, and he realized that the half that he would be left with was the half that couldn't get a job. So he and I started talking about an alternative. It was actually his suggestion. He said, would you be willing to be part of a research institute down here in Southern California where there was none? And I said, yes, but only if it was part of a university. So we then quickly went through the possibilities and realized that UCLA was the best possibility for us. And we went up there, and within 2 days had their agreement, the computer science people and their school, that they would love to have us join them. But they weren't allowed to make that decision. UCLA is part of the California State University system, and they had to get approval from the Board of Regents, which included the governor, and meets only every 6 months. We didn't have 6 months to wait. So we went to our second choice, which was USC. And USC had the huge advantage of being a private university. Keith, through some of his contacts, was able to arrange a dinner with Zohrab Kaprilyan, who was the provost at the time. It becomes very clear quite quickly that Zohrab would really like to have the Institute be part of USC for 2 reasons. One, we had money. We had this promise of a $6 million contract for the 3 of us, and we were going to hire people, and USC would get quite a bit of overhead money because of that. And so Zohrab saw that as a very good thing, but even more important was that we had expertise in an area that USC was quite weak in, computer science and networking. And we wound up putting USC on the map in those areas, and Kaprilyan was smart enough to recognize that that would happen. The other thing that was quite important to me was that we, being part of the university, we would have access to graduate students. Because that's where we could essentially grow more talent other than doing recruiting. It's like drafting instead of having to go out in the open market and recruit people. And so we talked quite a bit about that arrangement, and one of the things that we set up was that ISI personnel didn't have to be faculty. They could be research professors or just do research. But people who were interested in following an academic track, they could become full-time faculty as other people did, but just be housed out at ISI. But most people would only want a less tight connection and would be research professors. After that dinner, Kuprian made one phone call to the president of the university, not to ask permission, but to inform the president what he was doing. So ISI was formed in one dinner meeting, and it's because we were very attractive because DARPA wanted to increase our funding. So Keith, Tom Ellis, who was Keith's deputy, and I were given a 3-year, $6 million contract, which in '72 was a lot of money. It represented more than 20 full-time equivalents funding. So that was a huge commitment on DARPA's point, but they wanted this institute and the talent that we already had at RAND, plus a lot more. We had to find a place for the institute because USC wanted the institute to be down on campus. They have a lovely campus, but it's in a terrible part of town. It was then, it still is. And we did not want to fight for space with the football team. We knew we'd lose that battle. So we argued that the institute had to be off campus so that space was just a commodity for us. If we needed more space, we'd buy it. And we looked around for a building, and we were very fortunate that in the center of where the three of us lived was this brand new office building in Marina Del Rey. And we were able to negotiate a lease for that building, which gave us the right of first refusal for any of the space that became available. And we started with a half a floor, and we ultimately chewed up 5.5 floors of that building. We worked our way down from the top. We justified it because the machines at that time were big heat monsters, and by being on the top floor, the air conditioning that had to go up on the roof was much cheaper to install. But it also gave us by far the best view of any research institute anywhere along the California coast. And that helped an awful lot in recruiting. I remember our first meeting in the building that we had just signed this lease for, and there was nothing. That the floor was completely open from the east wall to the west wall, from the north wall to the south wall, with just glass on the exterior and a concrete floor. We actually got new computers rather than move the ones out of RAND. And they had to put in the air conditioning first, and then they had to finish all of the office space that we were occupying. And that took it took probably a couple months. So the people didn't move out of RAND right away. We stayed there, and they allowed that to happen because maintaining the funding access to DARPA was so important. We had said we were leaving. We were still at RAND, being paid by RAND from the money they were getting from DARPA until the new contracts and all of the space could be put together. The group at RAND was involved in a lot of the early networking work on the ARPANET, which was ARPA's first big push to get a nationwide network of systems that were hooked together in the academic community to allow first for the sharing of big machines, which were very expensive and the extra hours they could get from East Coast and West Coast researchers working on different schedules justified the early ARPANET. And then communication among those sites became the driving force. And Rand was involved in that early on. The other real big motivating factor was Keith Uncapher, who was performing a lot of infrastructure work for DARPA within the military and the rest of the government. And they wanted to keep Keith within the fold. Keith was a great manager because he basically left the technical work up to the technical guys and viewed his role as management, making sure that all the contracts came in and the salaries could be paid. He viewed his most important thing as being just hire good guys and let them do their thing. And I, of course, loved that, and as did other people at Rand. But it made it a great place to work, and DARPA gave us that freedom. So Keith was a hands-off manager. He knew that his expertise and the things he could do lay in the management area, and he was mainly concerned about hiring the right people who could create their own research directions. That worked out very well because I and other people loved to work for somebody that allowed us to go off and do things. When I was recruiting for ISI, I always was trying to find people that had their own direction. They didn't want a job working on something that was important to the Institute or me or Danny or anybody else. They had something that they wanted to accomplish. And what I often look for is, where did that idea come from? Was it theirs, or was it their thesis advisor's idea? And I was always looking for people that had created that idea themselves, because if they could do it once, they could do it again. And my questions were trying to probe about that idea. And so I would try to ask them questions that identified whether or not they were their own thinkers or they were merely expanding on something that somebody else had initialized. So I would agree that I asked them tough questions, but one of the interviews that I remember was while we were still living in the Marina. I got a cat and from the shelter, and when I brought it into the house, it was traumatized by the fact that it was in a car that was traveling, and cats don't like that. When I was bringing it from the car upstairs, I was holding it and it tried to get away, so I held it a little bit tighter and it tried to get away, and I held it a little bit tighter, and then it bit me, and I got a deep wound on the back of my hand, and I didn't do anything about it, but a couple of days later it really flared up, and I wound up in the hospital because they didn't know what kind of infection it was, and they put me in an isolation ward. I had an interview scheduled, and I had the guy come over to the hospital for the interview. So here I am in the ICU, and this guy is talking to me, and he was a lot more upset than I was. I don't think he survived that interview. I remember I was a program chair for one of the big computing conferences, and by that time we had gotten quite large committees to review the papers and pick out the best ones. And everybody had the task, everybody on the committee had the task of reading a whole lot of papers, and then going through rounds of winning them out to get to the best papers for the conference. And I proposed an alternative. I said, look, we'll take all the papers, we'll put them in a pile in the middle of the room, and you go through the papers, use any rules you want for which papers to look at. But if you find one good idea in that paper, let's accept it. The word of one committee member is good enough. It never got accepted, but that was the same thing, that you look for new ideas, and you wind up with the best papers and the best people. After Danny Cohn came to ISI, Danny and I were the chief ringleaders of a lot of what went on, but we set up a research management structure which allowed the division directors to decide jointly how extra money should be spent to start up new research directions. And Keith thought that was a very good structure. It lasted until Herb Shore came in. Herb had an IBM mentality, and he, as quickly as he could, tried to dismantle that. But that was at a time when ARPA was switching to more individual contracts for work, so it actually dovetailed pretty well. But getting back to Keith, once Danny came and he and I helped set major directions for the ISI research, Bob Kahn remarked not once but several times that Keith's role was to provide a little bit of adult supervision for Danny and I. At the beginning of ISI, we started with three of us, and Keith, Tom Ellis, who was Keith's deputy, and myself. So I was originally the staff, and I actually had cards printed up with that being my title. Now, Danny was a special case because we didn't so much recruit him as DARPA decided that ISI was the right place for Danny, and I interviewed him, but it was all in the cards that he was coming, so I couldn't ask him hard questions or make life tough for him. In fact, he turned the tables on me. ISI at the time had the two top floors of the building, and the computers being up on the 12th floor, everybody else was on the 10th floor, and there were two key offices that overlooked the marina, corner offices. One was Keith's on the north side of the building, and mine on the south side. When Danny came in and we were talking, Danny saw that that the office had a great view of LAX, which was just to the south of us. And Danny was a pilot at that time, and that was one of his great passions. And so Danny said that he would only come to ISI if I gave him that office. So I had to pay a big penalty to get Danny to come, but it was okay because we were about to move down onto the 10th floor as an expansion, and so my group moved down to the 10th floor, and I got the office directly below Danny's. Danny and I played pranks on each other, and one of them was we were building an email service at the time, and everybody was doing different parts, and I put in a vacation facility where you could put a message in that says, I'm on vacation and I won't be back until such and such a time. If you need immediate response, go to talk to somebody. Just after the facility started working, I went off on a vacation, and Danny decided that he would forge a message from me to me, so that that message would be received, it would be replied to, and then the reply would be replied to, and so on, so that by the time I got back, there would be a gazillion messages in my inbox. This is typical of what Danny would do. But in this case, he was very disappointed to learn that when I programmed this, I put in a caching feature which says that if we've told somebody I'm on vacation once, we don't have to tell them again. And so there was only a single message in my mailbox because of Danny's forged message. So that was one of the few times that I got the upper hand on Danny. Keith and Danny and I did a lot of travel back and forth to DC to set up projects, or in Keith's case, it was mainly to put out fires or create some infrastructure for DARPA. Keith was coming back from one of those meetings, and he fell asleep on the plane and never woke up. He was doing what he loved to do, and I mean, he was essentially at work when this happened, Keith, in many ways, was DARPA's first responder. Because he was always there to help them when they needed to put out a fire or build some infrastructure. My group was working on automatic compilation that you could, the idea was to make it easier for programmers to build programs. In fact, to make it, the ultimate goal was to allow computers to be programmed by non-programmers. And that was a 30-year endeavor. We in the community have been getting closer and closer to that, but one of our early wins was a language called GIST that allowed people to ignore the fact that computers can't represent infinite numbers. That they run out of space to represent those numbers. But you could express searches over infinite sets, which made it much easier to express what you wanted, and the compiler would fill in and do it with a finite set of things that it was iterating through. That was a big win. When we founded the Institute in '72, we became part of the ARPANET, and we were in the second round of ARPANET sites. The second round expanded that to 13, and it was still all academic institutions. And much of the early activity of the ARPANET was developing protocols that allowed different types of communication to occur. First textual, then voice, and ultimately video. And John Postel was the secretary for all of those protocols. So ISI led the committees that were developing those protocols and disseminated them, and that was all done on John's watch. In fact, John created the organization known as ICANN, which gave out internet addresses. So that work was initially housed at ISI. My group facilitated the dissemination of Lisp machines to all of the groups that DARPA was funding that were doing AI research, because Lisp was a big part of the language for expressing those AI systems at the time. Because DARPA had this umbrella contract with us, it was much easier for them to give us the money for all the Lisp machines that they wanted to distribute, and then have us ship them to the individual universities. We got 5 of those machines for people in my group to use, and the use of those machines increased the speed of development of that branch of AI quite significantly. So we were able to play a role in making that happen community-wide. In AI, the big shift that's come recently is the shift from expert systems to so-called deep learning, or the use of neural nets to do learning type systems. And that's been very successful, led mainly by MIT. The problem is that those systems are basically black boxes. They produce an answer. It's usually good. When it's not good, you don't know why. And a lot of the work that's going on now is to make those systems more transparent. One of the things that we did in our group while developing expert systems was to create what we called explainable expert systems, which could say, here's the logic that was used in going from the premises to the conclusion. And that work was quite seminal at the time, but disappeared when the expert systems disappeared. But it's now being recreated for these deep learning models. We developed technology which allowed the execution of programs to be intervened, so that we wove our way into the execution of programs, and the pieces that were intervened were able to check whether it made sense for that program to be doing that thing at this time. So for instance, overwriting sensitive information was not deemed a good thing. And so these programs could be checking it on the fly as it was going on, and they could halt the program execution if it was bad. So this was the first instance of non-perimeter security, which is still what we practice largely today. We set up our security defenses on the outsides of systems, trying to keep the adversaries from getting into the system, rather than looking over the shoulder of the programs that are executing. And so we developed quite a few different tools for monitoring program execution and checking it against a set of rules about what that program was allowed to do. And this has become an industry-wide thing where there's a lot of this type of work going on. It hasn't replaced the perimeter defenses yet, but it's getting much closer, and it's everything that you hear about as zero-day defenses. Zero-day referring to the fact that you're looking to stop behavior that you've never seen before. It's not that you've had an attack and you've developed a patch to fix it, which is the main way that we're still doing cybersecurity, but instead saying this is bad behavior, let's just not allow it. And so that represents a big advance, and we were instrumental in getting that technology out into the field. In fact, we came very close to providing the cybersecurity for DARPA. One of the program managers who was doing our cybersecurity contracts started using our system on his computer to provide extra benefits beyond what the commercial cybersecurity people could provide. And it worked out so well that he suggested that DARPA use that system for all of its machines. And we actually did a test with them to see if we could provide that service. And the first time they put our system on their machines, they found malware that had been lurking there unbeknownst to them. Now, it wasn't something that had come in and corrupted it. It was part of a test that they had put on their own machines, but forgot to take off. But we found it the very first time they turned on their system. And so we went through a quite lengthy thing, and they set up a final test for us to do this, and we failed the test because they gave us a machine that we had never seen before that had multiple accounts on the same machine. At that point, this was in the probably the late 80s. We were used to personal machines, that everybody had their own machine. And that was true at DARPA except for their administrative staff. Their administrative staff shared machines. We never thought about it, and they didn't keep our software didn't keep separate profiles for those different people because we didn't think about it. And we failed the test because of that. But otherwise, ISI would have still been the security contractor for DARPA, which is quite ironic because in the early days, when we were still using these humongous machines, whenever I'd go to the East Coast for a meeting, I wouldn't have access to any of the ISI machines because they were out here. So I would go into DARPA and use their machines to do my work. Sometimes it was on the weekend, and the only ones that would be there would be Vince Cerf and Bob Kahn and myself. Sometimes they would leave before me, and they would say, make sure you turn out the lights when you leave. Whenever I mentioned that to the security people at DARPA, they just rolled their eyes because life isn't that way anymore